In this video, we're going to discuss the composition and the role of the board of directors for a corporation. So the board of directors is essentially a group of people, and these people are called directors. They're elected by the common shareholders of a corporation to oversee the company's operations. So if you own preferred stock, you're not going to get to vote for the people who are going to serve on the board of directors. If you own common shares, then you will get to vote to have some say in who's going to get on this board of directors. Now, the duties of the board of directors are many. So one of the things they do is they hire the CEO, and if necessary, they can fire the CEO. So it's up to the board of who is ultimately going to get hired to run the company on a day-to-day basis. They also determine the CEO's pay. They declare and issue dividends. They make decisions that are related to acquisitions that the company might be involved with. And then they're in charge of overseeing the financial reporting process. Okay? Now, the directors, the majority of them should be what's called independent or outside directors. You've got outside directors and you've got inside directors. So outside directors are people that have no material interest in the company. When I say no material interest, I mean if they don't own 10% of the shares, they're not the CEO or the CFO. Okay, so we say that they're independent. They don't really have a stake in the outcome of the firm's profitability and so forth, right? So an example of an outside director would be somebody who's a college professor and has really no major shareholdings in this company, or a CEO of a different firm, right? So a CEO of a different company in a different industry. They just happen to sit on the board of directors for your company. Okay. Now, an inside director is somebody who does have a material interest in the company. So, for example, the CEO. The CEO is almost always a member of the board of directors, and in some cases can actually also be the chairperson of the board. Okay, so the CEO is not considered independent because the CEO has a material interest in the company, right? The CEO is running the company. We can't say that the CEO is going to be independent. Okay, now there are additional qualifications on what is independent, what is not, and in some cases it actually depends, for example, on what stock exchange you're listed on. If you're on the New York Stock Exchange, the NASDAQ, there are different requirements of what is considered to be independent, how long have you not worked for the firm, and so forth. So I'm not going to go into all those details, but for right now, just understand, if we're talking about a shareholder who owns a lot of stock in the company, if we're talking about the head of the employees union for the company, we're talking about the CFO, the CEO, all those people are inside directors, and the other people who have no interest are outside directors. Why that's important is because actually you should have a majority of the directors be these independent directors, okay? Now, the board of directors is going to make decisions typically by majority vote. So you have 7 people and then 4 people vote that, okay, we're going to issue a dividend, then okay, majority rules and so forth, right? But it's always going to be determined by each corporation's own bylaws, okay? Now so we've got the board, but then the board will also form subcommittees, okay? Well, technically committees, not subcommittees. So we'll have this board. So here's our board. What I mean is like subgroups. So we've got the board, we got this, but then the board says, okay, now we're going to form an audit committee. We're going to form a compensation committee. Okay, we're going to form a governance committee. And these are made up of members of the board, these different committees. Okay, so the governance committee, what they're in charge of doing is determining CEO succession. And that's when, okay, we make a plan when the CEO is going to retire, or if we need to fire the CEO, how we're going to replace the CEO, what we're going to do. That's called CEO succession. They also come up with principles for governance for the company. And then they form the other committees. They're in charge of assigning people, making committee assignments for the other committees, such as the compensation committee. The compensation committee is primarily in charge of figuring out the CEO's pay. Is the CEO going to receive a lot of stock options? Is the CEO going to receive a bonus? How is all that going to work? That's all determined by the compensation committee, which typically has independent directors only. And so the CEO is not going to be on the compensation committee, right? It makes sense. You shouldn't be on a committee determining your own pay. Now, there's also an audit committee, which has a very important role as well. They're in charge of hiring the external auditor for the company. So if we're talking about a large publicly traded company, they're going to hire one of the big 4 firms, right? So the audit committee is in charge of hiring the auditor. And if the auditor, for example, in the course of their audit were to discover some type of fraud, they would then report that to the audit committee. and so forth. And so I'll make another video and we'll talk more in depth about the very important role of the audit committee.